As you probably all know, we are living in a toxic soup, and the situation is getting worse. What can we do? Well, health coaches can be part of the solution because they can partner with individuals to help them to detoxify, not by doing cleanses or some regimens that might be not the solution, because we're talking about being in this for the long term. And it's important to live your life on a daily basis, detoxifying. And that's what we talk about with one of my favorite guests. She's been a guest on our podcast before, Dr. Aly Cohen. She has a new book out, which she will be talking about on today's episode. So let me tell you about Dr. Aly Cohen. She is a board-certified physician practicing in rheumatology and integrative medicine, as well as an environmental health expert in Princeton, New Jersey. Her new book, Detoxify, the everyday toxins harming your immune system and how to defend against them, is available now for pre-order. It connects the dots between everyday chemicals and the epidemic rise in immune disorders and autoimmune disease and what we can do about it. She is a real rock star. She is on the faculty of the Academy of Integrative Health and Medicine, Southern California University of Health Sciences, and the Integrative and Functional Medicine Fellowship of the Susan Samuel Integrative Health Institute at the University of California in Irvine, where she created and manages the environmental medicine and integrative rheumatology curriculum for her medical colleagues. She has collaborated with the Environmental Working Group, Cancer Schmancer, and other disease prevention organizations, and is co-editor of the textbook Integrative Environmental Medicine. She's a co-author of the best-selling consumer guidebook, Non-Toxic: Guide to Living Healthy in a Chemical World, also published by Oxford University Press. In 2015, she created the smarthuman.com to share environmental health, disease prevention, and wellness information with the public. She is one of the top docs, Philadelphia and New York Magazine's 2020 to 2025, Exceptional Women in Medicine 2020 to 2025, the New Jersey Healthcare Heroes Award in Education for the Smart Human Educational Platform in 2015, and the 2016 Burton L. Eichler Award for Humanitarianism. Wow, she is on a mission, and I am so excited to bring her to you. So without further ado, the episode with Dr. Aly Cohen. Welcome back to the Parkinson's Solutions Summit. I am your co-host, Dr. Sandra Scheinbaum, and today I am so pleased to introduce you to Dr. Aly Cohen. I'm going to turn it over to you, Dr. Aly, to share with our audience about your background.
Okay, great. Well, thank you. First of all, thank you for having me. And thank you, listeners, for taking the time to listen to this conversation, which I hope will be enlightening and also empowering, believe it or not. I am an integrative rheumatologist. So I'm trained in rheumatology, as well as integrative medicine. And I trained through the Andrew Weil Center for Integrative Medicine and became board certified. But I'm also an environmental health specialist. And some people know my history and how I got involved with this through my dog getting sick. And so there's a long story behind this, but essentially I didn't ask for this position. I just kind of was thrown in. And it's been really kind of an incredible journey understanding how chemicals, specifically chemicals, environmental, radiation, sleep, stress, all of these factors contribute to what's called environmental health. So I thought I could really jump in and talk about some of the things I've written about and researched in regard to Parkinson's disease, which is your topic.
Well, let's dig in. Let's start by talking about synthetic chemicals. What is the state of synthetic chemicals, particularly in the United States?
Yeah, this is a really sad state of affairs, which really took me by surprise about 15 years ago, 10 to 15 years ago. And it's continues to, make me kind of upset as I yesterday was walking through the mall and saw an entire, store dedicated to painting little girls' nails, and just the smell was wafting through the mall. And, listen, I do my share of environmental exposures, intentionally, like hair coloring and that kind of thing. But I think it's really important for people to understand what the problems are, what the numbers are, and then they can make their own decisions based on good information. So there are currently somewhere between 90,000 and 95,000 environmental chemicals, which are man-made, human-made synthetic chemicals that are now infused into everything we unfortunately love, from food packaging to chemicals on fabrics that make them stain guarded and stain proof, to food wrappers to make them grease proof, to bisphenol A and BPA, which many have heard of, and all of the different substitutions for BPA that are in canned foods still today, all canned foods, as part of things that are made plastic, including, even our computers and our televisions, our phone cases. So we are kind of infused with chemicals, not just in the stuff that we carry around and use, but also what we ingest, from over 10,000 food additive chemicals that have been added in, as well as water contaminants, which I hope we'll have time to get into specifically in regard to Parkinson's. So we have kind of infused ourselves with all these chemicals, and more so out of convenience. In the 1950s, after World War II, we had a huge increase in the development of many chemicals for pesticides and for agriculture, to protect our troops overseas against malaria and some of these pesticides and, tick-borne illnesses. So again, there was this big rush to market, and we have no oversight from the United States. Our government doesn't require the vast majority of these chemicals to be tested for any amount of safety or toxicity in our products, which is just jaw-dropping. So I'll repeat it. Our cosmetics, our cleaning products, all of our textile chemicals, even our food additives, to be honest, because they are not requiring testing before going into our food, have no testing required by manufacturers for safety, toxicity, and specifically even in certain demographics like children, pregnant women, the elderly, and those who are immune compromised. So, we're really in a situation where our 4.5 million years of evolution, where we relied on really natural sources for water, for air quality, for food, has really changed so dramatically, just primarily over the last 100 years. And I will make the argument that that's why we're getting sicker, and getting sicker younger, with a lot of conditions and diseases, including rheumatologic diseases, that we never used to see before, not just in humans, but in humans that are younger with no family history even.
Wow. So it sounds like these regulatory failures have really played a role in the safety issues with these chemicals, and also the pervasiveness, would that be fair to say?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, really, a lot of these chemicals, they don't kind of, so to speak, smack you in the face. They don't always give you a rash. They're insidious. They make their way low levels over time into our body through skin, through air quality and breathing in, and also ingestion, of course, through water or any liquids as well as food. So, they're insidious. And so most people don't think of them as harmful because they don't affect us acutely in most cases. And the argument really is that small amounts, even parts per million, parts per billion, parts per trillion, have been now shown through international research and robust literature on this, to really have health effects, and maybe not acutely, such as food allergies, which we know obviously are on the rise. We can't bring cupcakes in with our kids to school, but we're talking about long-term chronic health issues, which are metabolic as well as immune system related.
So what are some of these large classes of chemicals that are in our daily lives that we're talking about? Can you describe those?
Sure. The list for what they do is so, long in terms of whether they're designed for a function to degrease something, or as a solvent or as paint or as pesticides or whatever they're designed for. Then there are breakdowns of chemicals for what they hurt, whether they're toxic or liver toxic. And so the way you chop up these chemicals and divide them out is really based on what you're trying to frame, the story you're trying to tell. I think for the most part, I can limit the discussion to things that really affect us, a lot of us on a daily basis that we can relate to. So for instance, bisphenol A or BPA, which is something that many people have heard was removed from plastic baby bottles, actually by my co-author for 2 books, Dr. Fred Vom Saal and his colleagues, over 20 years ago, the research began on that. And bisphenol A is an endocrine disruptor. It was first discovered to modulate estrogen at low levels, also modulate androgens, which are male hormones like testosterone, among others. And so these chemicals we now know, like bisphenol A, and the regrettable, substitutions, once they take BPA out, they often will put in something similar because that's not banned, such as BPS and BPSIP and BPFB, and the list goes on. But those tend to have the same properties as BPA. And so it's kind of a continuous whack-a-mole. But BPA is one of the most, largest production compound around the world because it has so many uses. It's been used, as I mentioned, not only in the past, but currently in almost every canned food or drink that we pick up. So that includes our organic foods often. I mean, there's only very few, maybe 0.01% of all cans are made without BPA, but again, could have substitutions. But in general, BPA tends to make plastics hard. And when I use an example from the time of Bayer aspirin, when we had clear bottles with aspirin, that was one of the first inventions when they realized that BPA could be interlocked and create a hard plastic that's clear. And so that took off because now we could save on a lot of, natural resources such as wood or stainless steel or any metals. These were to save our resources is to use plastic, things that were unbreakable. Then there's another class that is called phthalates, which are plasticizing chemicals as well. And there's hundreds, if not thousands of those. And those are often used to make plastics bendable and flexible. So think cords on your computer, possibly your phone case, if it's bendable, depending. Again, I don't want anyone to flip out here. But the idea is that it makes plastic, I'll give you some other examples. Hairspray have a lot of phthalates in order to make it not brittle. Nail polish has phthalates added often. So a lot of things that need to be flexible but not break. Vinyl is a phthalate component. So, vinyl shower curtains, vinyl flooring, anything with vinyl is often made with phthalates. So we have different classes of chemicals in cosmetics like parabens, which are often used in food as preservatives, not just in cosmetics to keep cosmetics lasting longer. But phthalates also have to do with fragrance and keeping fragrances lasting longer on the shelf, on our bodies. So again, I'm not here to gloom and doom. I want to actually spend a lot of time, if we can, talking about what to do about the problem. But I want to just make sure people get the point that it's just a very pervasive problem.
Yeah. And would it be accurate to say that they are creating both acute and chronic health issues?
Yeah, I think that's what the literature has, really shown, especially when they look at specific phthalates like DHP and certain flame retardants that we've infused into couches over the years, which is only voluntarily removed now, when they've looked at BPA specifically. So when they're using sort of a one representative of a class, it's easy to say that the rest of the class probably have similar properties, and that's what's panned out. But we have robust literature on the way many of these chemicals, thousands of chemicals, work in the human body and in animal studies, in epidemiologic studies, and occupational studies as well. And so, the literature is pretty powerful when it comes to explaining this and showing that the evidence exists, so that we can move on to what to do. Yeah.
Specifically, can you discuss the association with these chemicals and the development of Parkinson's?
So we have, now had enough literature and certainly much of a problem because we know that Parkinson's has been on the rise. So because there's a need to figure this out so desperately because of certain diseases that have increased, we know that, women are having their periods younger, young girls. That's a component of environmental chemical exposure, especially the estrogenic component. And we know that autoimmune diseases, as I can discuss, really have been on the rise as well over the last 2 or 3 decades. But Parkinson's also, unfortunately, which is considered an autoimmune disease, it's a neurodegenerative autoimmune disease, similar to, say, maybe in multiple sclerosis. But by no means is it left, away from this immune system process. And what we now know is it's essentially it's on the rise. Over the last 10 years, it's risen 35% in terms of its incidence. So we have a real problem. It's expected to really actually increase in the next 25 years. It's expected to double in the next 25 years unless we start to take control over what we do in our home, in our households, and with our kids and our parents. It's been a six-fold increase, in patients who, or I should say, in people that were occupationally exposed. So we know we have the data from especially occupationally, particular as it pertains to those who work with pesticides. I don't want to limit this only to a conversation of pesticides, but I will say that the data is pretty strong that farm workers and those who occupationally work in the fields and handle these type of chemicals, and again, pesticides, there are thousands that have been approved for market use in the US and around the world. They've actually been well, established to be associated with the development with Parkinson's disease. Now, mind you, there's also been great literature on the idea that we have genetic predisposition. Like with everything else in life, there's this dance between our genetics and what we've been given through birth, the exposures that we have throughout our lifetime, and then, of course, our lifestyle and how we manage our lifestyle, whether we exercise a lot, sweat a lot, eat clean food a lot, eat foods without pesticides in them, drink water that's been filtered. So it's that combination of genetics, environment, and lifestyle that truly helps to establish risk for developing any disease. But in the case of Parkinson's, we know that it's primarily environmentally induced, because even one of the biggest studies that looked at 70,000 twins found that only about 3% developed Parkinson's from that familial or genetic component alone. And so we do know that it's primarily environmental, which leads to this question: what are we exposed to? How are we exposed? And better yet, how can we work to get rid of these exposures? And I'm going to, help with that. But the idea is that, there's this component of dopamine. There's a couple theories, but certainly the genetics behind conversion of dopamine into its active form can get blocked from some of these chemical exposures that, and I can name a bunch of pesticides, but I'm not trying to scare anyone. And then there's this question of metabolic issues. Are the mitochondria, that are the cellular structures that create ATP and energy within our body, but in our brains, getting affected by these pesticides and some other chemicals, which we'll go into, and can that be affecting, creating what's called oxygenated, or I say, oxidative stress, where the mitochondria aren't working to their best ability and creating and having the right physiology. So, the idea, the theories vary, but we know that there's damage either at the cellular level, at the transport or receptor level. There's other chemicals. There's chemicals like, I'm sure some of your guests have heard of Camp Lejeune, and some of these water contaminants, that particularly TCE, trichloroethylene, which is a solvent. And so again, industrial chemicals that we created that are getting into our bodies through water, through exposure to work, from chemicals exposure through work. But, they're kind of insidiously getting into our bodies. So there's some good ideas as to how to keep that, reasonable in terms of how to block those inputs. But generally speaking, that's how many of these chemicals are working from environmental exposures.
Wow, pretty scary picture. But we can do something about it. So let's turn there. What can we do to reduce our exposure to these toxic chemicals in our lives?
Yeah. And so I'm here to tell you that it can be done. We know that many behaviors that we embrace, or even in the past or moving forward, can help to eliminate a lot of chemical exposures that cause harm for any disease, any risk that may potentially happen. And so one of the ways I look at things, and I share this with my patients as well as other people to my platform, The Smart Human, is I try to teach people that, first of all, you want to remove as much as you can the exposure once you can identify it. And I think you just have to learn about where these exposures come from, so that then you know, and when you know, you do better. And so you start to, for instance, I'll stop some of these, landscaping people, and I'll say, please put on a mask, put on gloves. Not switch your job. You may need that job, but really, how do you protect yourself better? Even if your boss doesn't necessarily go to any lengths to help protect you, change your clothes before you go into your home, especially, if you have children, you don't want to track shoes into the house once you've been out working in a field or working with chemicals or gardening. I mean, so people were using Roundup and still use Roundup. Well, now it's been taken off the market because glyphosate is such a toxic chemical. So we want to really think about what are the exposures that we unknowingly put ourselves into and surround ourselves with, and how can we just either swap out or remove those chemicals, or at least protect our home environment from bringing and tracking those chemicals in. Have a bucket outside for shoes. Have a separate washer dryer that you can use, perhaps if you're gardening or that's your occupation as agriculture. So that's one really good way to do those types of chemicals. There is different types of gardening, which certainly do not involve chemicals. And this has become, very popular. Rutgers University has a whole gardening center, which people can get involved with. So there's just a lot of opportunities to really explore doing gardening and environmental work without chemicals that are pesticides specifically. When it comes to drinking water, which happens to be one of my favorite topics, we really need to think about how our water is contaminated, because number one, it is, which a lot of people don't realize, our municipal tap water, which feeds 80% of our country, the US, 20% is wells that are local to that home or to that town, which have their own issues, from just, chemicals coming from miles away. But we also have municipal tap that comes from, areas where the water's cleaned in the treatment plants. Both have their issues. And so what I really recommend people doing is filtering your drinking water, whether it comes from a well or whether it comes from municipal tap, because that you can control within your home. When it comes into your home, that is where you can filter it, whether it's a carbon block filter, like a pitcher or a faucet head or a refrigerator door filter, all the way through to what I would more recommend actually is the reverse osmosis, but vetted reverse osmosis, because so many of them tout, doing so well for your water system, but they actually remove far less chemicals than I would recommend. So, vetting those is very important. And I post a lot of this information on my platform, The Smart Human. But I want people to understand that there are options. And so water is a great way to start reducing those exposures, because even TCE and some of these chemicals from Camp Lejeune, which are considered safe in the water at 5 parts per billion by the US EPA, many would argue that's far above where it should be, especially if you're drinking large amounts of water. So you can see how the volume could make a difference. So water, food, trying to go with cleaner food, meaning USDA organic, which actually removes or doesn't allow for genetically modified ingredients, most harmful pesticides and fertilizer chemicals. The soil has to be clean when growing those plants. So clean water, clean food, removing inciting agents from your life as much as you can. And then moving into detoxing, which would be, harnessing our anthropologic, benefits of sweating, of moving our bodies to make those mitochondria work harder and to keep our bodies moving, sweating, makes our liver see more blood flow, which helps to break down a lot of our chemical exposures. So going back into our history of evolution, we've really had some beautiful developments in the human body to help us work to remove chemicals, even though our bodies have never seen these chemicals for most of our existence. We can still harness those attributes for our benefit.
I want to point out that if this may seem overwhelming and you're wondering, where do I start? Health coaches can help to help you find good sources of information, as well as help you to say, well, we're going to start at one point. We can start small. It doesn't have to be overnight. And then gradually you might remove more and more products, or you might do more and more things to support your detox pathways.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm telling your audience a lot of information. This is 10 years in the making. But I want to share with your audience that this was a really big journey for me. And I had no idea what I was doing. And I was really trying to figure this out, trying to believe whether the facts that I was learning was even true, let alone how to actually start, working on these issues. And so, again, I've written books about how to remove these chemicals. I'm not trying to promote my book on this session, but I want people to know there are great resources that are simple, not over the top. And I think people could really do one change a month, and then maybe one change every other week, and one change, so I think it's a journey. And I think people should take their time to do what fits well into their lives, what they can conquer little by little, with not feeling overwhelmed, because that is the goal. It's not to overwhelm people. It's to help people change in a way that makes them comfortable, that will stick, instead of being like a diet or something that's short-lived.
Absolutely. Can you comment on things like air fresheners, those plugins, which maybe people are thinking, this is good, I'm going to have my house smelling fresh, where it's just the opposite?
Yes, yes. I write a lot about this. The day I had my moment, the light bulb went off when I was studying all of this information years ago, and I had an entire drawer in my kitchen, with everything from sea breeze to pumpkin spice and holiday, peppermint, and I mean, you name it. I had that scent, because it was exciting to feel, that I was just kind of changing with the seasons. And, people like rooms to smell nice. But guess what? A lot of those chemicals, which, by the way, we inhale and get right into our bloodstream, just like oxygen. And I really learned a lot about the chemicals that we inhale, and how, not once or twice or once a year, twice, like nothing crazy. But if you're really inhaling a lot of this stuff on a regular basis, it can be measured in your blood. It can be measured in your urine. It can be measured in breast milk. So it's really important to understand that the studies have already looked at this stuff, and we know that we're kind of filled with these chemicals. But good news is, I took the whole drawer, threw it away, and I regularly test my body, and I regularly have patients, explore these changes. And if they want to get tested to see the benefits of their changes, that's great. But not everyone has to do that. In fact, I encourage people to take their money and spend it on actually cool things like reverse osmosis, or more frozen organic food, which is great and full of nutrition, as even more so than fresh even. Or buy an air filter if you feel like you need that in the environment you live. So instead of testing as much, I really try to focus on using people's resources well. And I think that's been very helpful. But yeah, there's plenty we can do. And so, I encourage people to, share with others and get great resources, and trust people that they feel are legitimate.
And even regarding personal care products, cosmetics, skincare products, there's some wonderful, all natural, organic products out there. So there are resources available.
Absolutely. Even Environmental Working Group has a wonderful resource called Skin Deep Database, where I looked at my cosmetics and personal care and skin tanners. My son went to summer camp, and I said, well, that's fine. You can pick out, he's 14. So he wanted to, hang out with the ladies. And so I said, listen, if you find anything a 2 or a 1, you can get it. And sure enough, he picked up the app and did it. So if my 14-year-old can do it and my high school students I teach do it, I think it's really something where it actually will end up saving time, because you pick your, 5 to 10 products that you enjoy, that you know that are safe, that are vetted through toxicologists. And then it makes life a lot easier, really. So just takes time to get into it. And once you get into it and you get it over with, I tell you, there's a really good feeling about, kind of moving through life, with control over what ends up in your body, I think.
Oh, absolutely. So let's turn to nutrition. What can we do nutritionally to help offset some of the pathways for developing Parkinson's and perhaps better manage Parkinson's?
Yeah, so this was something we wrote quite a bit about, Dr. Vamsal and I, in our textbook and our guidebook. We were talking really about the big picture of nutrition. Actually, there's so much literature on not just removing these chemicals, as I mentioned, but bolstering our nutritional levels, which are actually protective against some of the changes that can occur at the gene level from environmental exposures. So, we need, elevated levels of D and vitamin C and iron, and those were shown to be protective, especially against lead in children that were tested. We know that having adequate amounts of omegas were really important for Parkinson's disease and for brain health. So we know that nutritionally it's quite important to support the tissues to do their functions that they were born to do, to offset the damage that come in from synthetic chemicals that we had no intention of being exposed to. So it's that combination of removing the bad and then, kind of giving the body, what I call the fertilizer to help it thrive. And so to me, that has made all the difference in terms of how people function with Parkinson's disease, but also for those who have family members that are concerned. Again, I said it was very limited information on familial, but more exposure type of worries. But again, some people live in the same home and they want to make sure that they're doing everything they can to prevent the risk of Parkinson's disease developing. And I think that's a legitimate concern. And so the idea is, let's get ourselves healthy so we can better combat our environment that we may or may not be able to control as well.
So, Dr. Aly, as we draw to a close, where can people find you? Because I know they're going to want more information.
I hope so. I hope I didn't scare anyone off. But I really do meter out, the positives, the empowering information so much. So I would love people to follow, what I share on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. It's called The Smart Human. I mentioned it a few times. But The Smart Human, thesmarthuman.com, The Smart Human podcast, YouTube channel, but certainly TikTok, Facebook, Twitter, X. And I'm really happy for people to follow there. Facebook is great, especially. I work really hard on that one. Instagram is more fun. So it's really got a little bit of a different flavor for each, platform. I'm in Princeton, New Jersey. If people need to reach me, want me to see, patients, either themselves or their family members, I'm more than happy to, see them for not just Parkinson's, but other, considerations, ailments, autoimmune issues, health, wellness. So really that's it. It's really the platform, The Smart Human. I do have a book called Non-Toxic Guide to Living Healthy in a Chemical World. So that's on Amazon, but it's really a guidebook, no endorsements, no brands. It's really clean. And so people will be able to understand that what's written there is written without any backhand deals or any kind of, endorsements. That's, important to me. So please check that out as a guidebook to help people walk through this difficult topic.
That would be a great resource. And I want to thank you. This has been enlightening, informative, and very, very practical. So thank you for being a guest on the Parkinson's Solutions Summit. Bye now.
Thank you.